She said it without anger. We were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, the same one I'd tightened the legs on last winter when it started to wobble. Morning light came through the window at a low angle, catching dust in the air. She didn't touch her coffee. Neither did I. I don't see a reason to stay anymore. That was it. No build-up, no edge in her voice. Just a statement, delivered the way you'd tell someone the weather has changed. I waited for the rest of it. An explanation, a complaint, something I could respond to. But nothing followed. She looked past me, not at me, like she was already somewhere else. She said she needed more. More space. More life. More than this. Her words were careful, practiced. I realized she'd already said them before, just not to me. There was no argument, no raised voices, no blame to push back against. Just a pause. And in that pause, I understood something quietly and completely. This wasn't a conversation. It was an ending. Until that morning, everything looked normal from the outside. Not impressive, not dramatic, just steady. I went to work, came home, paid the bills on time. Weekends were predictable, groceries, errands, a few hours of quiet. Once or twice a year we took short trips, nothing extravagant. Drive somewhere, stay a couple nights, come back rested enough to start over. We didn't live badly. We lived contained. I had learned to believe that stability was the point. A roof that didn't leak. A schedule that made sense. Money that moved where it was supposed to move. I thought consistency was its own form of care. I didn't chase bigger houses or newer cars. I didn't need noise to feel successful. I assumed that building something solid mattered more than decorating it. Looking back, that assumption was mine alone. She would make comments, small ones, usually framed as observations. A coworker's new place. A neighbor's remodel. A man she knew who had options. The way she said it always sounded casual, like she was just noticing the world. I treated it like background sound. Something you hear but don't stop to analyze. I told myself that comparison was normal. That people vent. That it didn't mean dissatisfaction, it just meant awareness. I never challenged it. Never asked what she was really measuring, or who. I didn't think silence was agreement. I thought it was maturity. Everything else reinforced the illusion. We laughed at the same shows. Ate dinner at the same time. Slept in the same bed. There were no obvious cracks. No sudden coldness. No dramatic shift I could point to and say, that's when it started. So I kept moving forward, believing routine was proof. Believing that because nothing was falling apart, everything must be fine. The change didn't announce itself. It accumulated. It was the phone first. Not the device itself, but how it lived in her hand. Screen angled away. Notifications silenced. Replies typed with her thumb shielded by her palm. If I spoke while she was reading, she'd answer without looking up. Sentences shortened to their skeletons. Yes. Later. I'm busy. Conversations stopped opening outward. They collapsed inward. Questions I asked came back shallow, already finished before they reached me. When I talked about work, she listened just long enough to be polite, then drifted. Her attention had a different gravity now, pulled somewhere I couldn't see. I noticed the timing. How she'd suddenly be unavailable during the same windows each week. How plans stayed tentative, flexible only in one direction. How irritation surfaced when I asked neutral questions, nothing accusatory, just clarifying. For a while, I tried to explain it away. Stress, fatigue, normal distance that comes with time. I used those words because they were familiar, because they didn't require action. They allowed me to stay still. Then one night, standing in the kitchen after she'd gone to bed, I realized I was lying, but not to her. To myself. I was editing reality to keep it survivable. So I stopped. I didn't confront anything. I didn't test theories or demand reassurance. I just let the details stand on their own, uncorrected. I watched without narration. Patterns didn't need interpretation anymore. They spoke plainly once I stopped interrupting them. Something shifted inside me then, not anger, not fear. Clarity. A quiet recalibration. I wasn't preparing a response. I wasn't deciding what to do. I was just no longer pretending I didn't see it. At some point, the effort stopped. Not the effort of showing up. I still did that. I went to work. I spoke when spoken to. I kept my voice even and my posture familiar. From the outside, nothing changed. But inside, something fundamental let go. I stopped trying to preserve the picture. There were no more internal debates about how to fix things. No late-night mental rehearsals of conversations I might initiate. I didn't suggest counseling. Didn't ask what she needed. Didn't offer solutions, compromises, or plans. Not because I was punishing her, but because I finally understood something simple. You don't negotiate with a decision that's already been made. The tension I'd been carrying wasn't grief. It was resistance. And once I stopped resisting, the pressure disappeared. I watched her move through the house with that half-distance she'd perfected. I answered politely. I didn't press. I didn't retreat either. I just occupied my space fully and quietly, the way you do when you know you're passing through a place for the last time. There was relief in that. Not happiness, relief. I realized how much energy I'd spent trying to keep a door closed that wasn't locked from my side. How much dignity I'd traded for the illusion of continuity. When I stopped doing that, I felt steadier. More myself than I had in months. The truth settled cleanly. When someone wants to leave, you don't block the door. You don't stand in the frame pleading your case. You step aside and let movement reveal its own cost. On the outside, I stayed calm. Inside, something finished breaking, and with it, the need to fight for what was already gone. She started mentioning him like an idea she was testing out loud. Not directly. Not with a name at first. Just references placed carefully into conversation, like she was gauging whether I'd react. A story about someone at work who moved fast. A comment about ambition, framed as admiration. A comparison slipped into the middle of an unrelated sentence, then withdrawn as if accidental. I listened. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't ask follow-up questions or challenge the framing. I let the words land and pass through without resistance. That seemed to encourage her. The more neutral I stayed, the more she spoke. Soon it sharpened. A name appeared. Then details. His schedule. His drive. His confidence. The way he thought about money. The way he lived at a different level. She never said it was romantic. She didn't have to. The shape of it was obvious. I noticed how she spoke about him compared to how she spoke to me. With him, there was admiration. With me, there was familiarity. One carried tension. The other carried weight. She didn't hear the contrast, but it was there every time. I began to pay attention the way I do on a job site. Not emotionally. Logistically. Timing. Frequency. Patterns. When his name came up. When it didn't. What followed after. I took mental notes and nothing else. No reactions. No expressions. I didn't interrupt or redirect. I let her build the outline herself. People reveal more when they think no one is measuring. And slowly, the pattern stopped being ambiguous. This wasn't curiosity. It was alignment. She wasn't talking about someone new. She was explaining a decision she'd already made. By then, I wasn't hurt. I was clear. And clarity is quieter than anger. Once the decision surfaced, everything accelerated. The paperwork came together fast. Faster than it should have. She didn't drag her feet or hesitate over details. She was efficient, organized, already thinking ahead. There was a momentum to it that had nothing to do with grief. This wasn't loss for her. It was transition. She talked about timelines the way people talk about upgrades. New city, new environment, new people who understood where she was headed. She said it casually, but there was urgency underneath it. Like something good was waiting and she didn't want to keep it waiting too long. What surprised me wasn't her speed. It was how quickly our shared life became a background detail. Things that had once been private, our routines, our history, the years, were suddenly treated as context she no longer needed to explain. I wasn't being argued with. I was being bypassed. Friends shifted quietly. Conversations shortened. Invitations stopped. I could feel myself moving from the center of the frame to the edge, then out of it entirely. The story no longer included my perspective because it no longer required it. I didn't protest. I didn't ask for fairness or closure. I focused on logistics, accounts, documents, separation points. I treated it the way I'd treat any dismantling job, carefully, cleanly, without unnecessary damage. By the time the divorce was finalized, it felt less like something ending and more like something that had already ended finally being acknowledged on paper. She was already elsewhere, mentally and emotionally. I wasn't chasing her. I was watching distance become official. What had once felt personal now felt structural. And once it reached that point, emotion stopped being useful. She came back months later. Not dramatically. Not announced. Just a message asking if we could talk. Neutral tone. No urgency. I agreed without hesitation, mostly because I already knew what the meeting would be, and what it wouldn't be. She looked smaller when she walked in. Not physically. Structurally. The confidence she'd carried during the exit wasn't there anymore. Her posture was careful. Her words rehearsed but unstable, like she hadn't settled on which version of the story she wanted to tell. She talked first, filled the space quickly, explained how things hadn't gone the way she expected, how plans shifted, how people weren't what they promised to be. She never said regret outright, but it sat between her sentences, heavy and unclaimed. I listened without interrupting. I didn't validate or challenge. I didn't rescue the narrative or correct it. I just let it exist. She waited for me to respond the way I used to. Patient, understanding, ready to absorb confusion and turn it into reassurance. She paused in places where I would have stepped in before. I didn't. When I finally spoke, it was brief. Practical. I didn't revisit the past or ask questions about choices she'd already made. I didn't need answers. I already had outcomes. The silence that followed was different from the ones we used to share. This one wasn't tense. It was resolved. She realized then that the version of me she'd left behind wasn't waiting where she'd put him. That I hadn't stayed in position. That I'd moved on without noise or spectacle. We ended the meeting politely. No closure speeches. No promises. Just two people acknowledging that the distance was now permanent. She left looking surprised. I stayed exactly where I was. I didn't interfere after that. I didn't check in or ask around. I didn't warn anyone or offer opinions. I kept my distance and let time do what it always does when no one is protecting a narrative. Things surfaced on their own. At first it was subtle. A move that didn't last. A job that sounded promising and then quietly ended. Mutual contacts mentioning her name with hesitation, then not at all. Information traveled the way it always does, imperfectly, indirectly, without drama. The man she'd aligned herself with disappeared from the picture without ceremony. No announcement, no explanation. 1 week he existed. The next, he didn't. Whatever certainty she'd built around him collapsed under its own weight. Ambition turned out to be a performance. Money turned out to be temporary. Plans turned out to be speculation. I observed from a distance, the same way you watch weather move across a landscape you no longer live in. I felt no urge to comment. No sense of justice being served. Just confirmation. Her choices began to cost her in ways she hadn't calculated. Stability vanished first. Then credibility. Then the audience she'd expected to applaud the transition. There was no villain to blame. No external force to push against. Just outcomes lining up behind decisions. I didn't feel satisfaction watching it happen. I felt relief that I wasn't inside it anymore. That I wasn't absorbing consequences meant for someone else. The illusion she'd chased required constant reinforcement. Once that stopped, it collapsed quickly. And without anyone there to steady it, it revealed what it always was: temporary, conditional, dependent. I stayed quiet, continued my routines, built a life that didn't need explaining. Some things don't require intervention. They resolve themselves if you step far enough back. There was no moment of victory. No phone call that felt like justice. No scene where the balance tipped back in my favor. Nothing cinematic. Just a gradual quiet that settled in once everything stopped asking something of me. I didn't feel better because things went wrong for her. I felt better because I wasn't responsible for making them go right anymore. That distinction mattered. I had spent years believing that endurance was the same as strength. That staying meant winning. Letting go taught me otherwise. What I preserved wasn't the relationship. It was myself, my routines, my sense of proportion, my ability to look at a situation without shrinking to fit it. The absence of chaos was noticeable. Mornings became simpler, decisions smaller and more accurate. I slept without rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I ate when I was hungry. I worked without distraction. My life didn't improve in leaps, it stabilized. Occasionally, I thought about how easily things could have gone differently if I'd panicked. If I'd argued. If I'd tried to compete with an image that was never real. I didn't feel pride about avoiding that. I felt gratitude. There was nothing to reclaim from the past. No lesson she needed to learn for me to move forward. Closure wasn't a conversation, it was a condition. And that condition arrived quietly, without permission or apology. I didn't win anything. I didn't need to. I kept my footing. I stayed intact. I didn't trade my values for reassurance or my future for familiarity. And when I measured the outcome honestly, that turned out to be enough. Peace, I learned, isn't loud. It's consistent. My life didn't become louder after she left. It became quieter in ways I didn't know I was missing. Fewer explanations. Fewer adjustments. Fewer moments where I had to translate myself to be acceptable. What replaced the noise wasn't excitement. It was accuracy. I stopped measuring my days against someone else's expectations. I chose work that made sense. Evenings that ended when they should. Friendships that didn't require performance. Nothing about it looked impressive from the outside, and that was the point. She walked away chasing wealth, momentum, and the promise of something elevated. I stayed with what I could verify. What I could build with my hands. What didn't disappear the moment attention shifted. Reality doesn't sparkle, but it holds. For a long time, I wondered if stopping her meant failing her. Now I understand it would have meant failing myself. You don't save people by standing in the way of who they've decided to become. I didn't stop her because I finally trusted the process. Because letting go was the most honest response available. And because the life I kept turned out to be enough.